Welcome to the Voices of War, a podcast with a simple vision to bring to life the true costs of war through the voices of those who've lived it. I'm your host Maz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi there. This is an episode that seeks to update our listeners on the current situation in Afghanistan. That is the reason why I'm also publishing it as soon as it's ready, which is slightly out of cycle of my normal publishing schedule. The events in Afghanistan are unfolding so fast that I thought it wise to put this episode out as soon as it was ready. Okay, let's go to Dr. Mike Martin. Today, I've asked Dr. Mike Martin to join me again on the podcast to discuss recent events in Afghanistan. You can hear Mike's full bio in our previous episode, linked in the show notes, as well as through his own website, which is also linked. In short, though, Mike has spent years studying Afghanistan, did his PhD on British involvement in Helmand, is a fluent Pashto speaker, and is the author of the book An Intimate War, considered by many Afghanistan experts as the most authoritative book on the dynamics and true nature of conflict in this part of the world. Dr. Mike, thanks for joining me on the show again.
Hey, Maz. Thanks, mate.
And just for context, we're recording this on a Sunday, the 15th of August, and it is 6:45 in Kabul at the moment. And we're hearing reports that Kabul is under serious threat. And over the past days and weeks and even months, the situation in Afghanistan has deteriorated significantly. So I've asked Mike to come on. And Mike, just maybe before we kind of delve into the current situation, maybe you can set the context for us and maybe just talk to us about what has happened since the Doha Agreement and even what the Doha Agreement might be about.
Sure. So I'm sure all your listeners will be aware the US and its allies have been involved in a war in Afghanistan since 2001.
For
many of your listeners will
Although we can't make assumptions, yes.
Yeah. So in February 2020, Trump fulfilled one of his campaign promises. He had a lot of campaign promises, and he was quite big on fulfilling them, which was end all these wars. And so the US signed an agreement with the Taliban representatives in Doha, and it was kind of called a peace deal at the time, but it wasn't. It was an exit agreement. Agreement being quite a loose word. Effectively, the US was going to pull out. The Taliban promised that Afghanistan wouldn't be used as a base for terrorism. They cut their links to AQ and all the rest of it. The Taliban and very important, right? The Afghan government were completely cut out of this agreement, which is crazy, which was a long-standing precondition of the United States to any talks with the Taliban, right? So Trump just said, get rid of that.
It had the Security Council approval, though, as well, right? And the key players like Russia, Pakistan, and so on all supported it, but the Afghan government was not at all involved, right?
Absolutely. Russia and China, I think as we might get into geopolitics later, like Russia and China, there's a huge regional play going on at the moment. Anyway, so they had this agreement, and then also in that agreement, the Taliban were meant to have a dialogue with the Afghan government, but that just hasn't really happened. I mean, it's kind of fits and starts, talking past each other, really. And then also the US was going to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners, and a lot of these were held in Afghan government custody. So actually the US had to kind of pressure the Afghans to release them. So it's kind of madness. And then it was done over a very short period of time. So, the Russians, when they decided to leave, in 1986, they put Najibullah in, and then they spent 3 years telling Najibullah to broaden the base of his government, include more tribes, do reconciliation, reach out to other kind of ethnicities and regions and all that kind of stuff, and pull together something that would last as long as the Russians put some money in. And that did last. It lasted until 1992, so it lasted 3 years. Now, the Ghani government, so Ashraf Ghani, the former president, that was a Freudian slip. President of Afghanistan. Because we've got sort of, obviously I've been up since many hours because I'm trying to get a good friend out of Kabul as well. So I'm trying to sort of work on my contacts to do that. But certainly one of the, and as you can imagine, on social media, everything's been rumors and craziness, and I've been speaking to people all over the place. But one of the rumors was that there was a helicopter that landed on the rooftop of the presidential palace. So one assumes that Ghani is gone.
Right. Okay. But that at this stage is speculation, given the time, and we might. Yeah, throughout the day, we might even confirm that, if that's what you're saying.
By the time this comes out, then, you'll be able to, you can do it, yeah. And so, where did we get to in that story? Sorry, my head
we were just, no, absolutely. And I appreciate that you're under a lot of pressure. And just for context as well, you've been speaking to a lot of other media outlets far bigger than the Voices of War. So you've been up for many hours, but...
There's nothing bigger than the nothing.
No, but I think the context we're trying to set, I appreciate the plug. Yeah. The context was the Doha Agreement and where that got us to basically,
And for comparison with the Russians, right? And what Ghani had never done was build a broad-based political settlement. It's Afghanistan, right? So you have to, if you're the government or you want to rule Afghanistan, you need a broad-based political franchise, or you need a lot of military force, or some kind of combination of the two. And Ghani, so his background, right, is he's a kind of World Bank academic. He actually wrote a book on fixing failed states. So this really is his whole worldview crumbling around him. And he was a technocrat. Like the way that you and I, when we've deployed and we've done our, post-conflict reconstruction, this sort of conflict by spreadsheet stuff, very technical in nature, number of textbooks delivered, elections run, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And there's a box, marked inclusive political settlement, and you tick it.
That's right. It's a formula. If then, right? It's a it's a neat formula which doesn't.
But war is political, right? All war is political. This is a kind of fundamental nature of it. And so what inclusive political settlement means in Afghanistan is talking to some people that actually you don't really agree with at all. Like, you need to bring in, there's the internal piece about warlords and whatever, and then there's the external, the regional piece, which we'll talk about, Pakistan, Iran, Russia, Central Asian states, China, of course, India. There's a huge, and really none of that. So the US and its allies spent 20 years there, didn't build a broad political franchise inside the country because they viewed it as a technical, like, conflict by spreadsheet exercise. And didn't really do much regional work either to solve to tie in, because each of those ethnic groups in Afghanistan has got links, the Pashtuna in Pakistan as well, the Uzbeks are in Uzbekistan, Tajiks in Tajikistan, and so on and so forth. I was going to say, I think that's something we spoke at length in our previous episode as well, is the and we refer to it as the ecosystem, that it's a place that is alive. It's anything but black and white. And we broadly speaking didn't really understand the war. The war we thought we fought was not the war we fought. And I think we're seeing that now, right? And that's maybe a way to bring us into kind of the more recent events, because I think that's something that's, I think, surprised many people, is the speed and pace of the Taliban takeover. Maybe is there a reason that you can kind of put to that as to why it has even occurred, why it's happened so quickly, why it's happened? The US withdrawal, of course, and so on. I'd imagine that would have to play a part. Well, the foundational stuff is what we've already discussed, right? Ghani didn't build a political settlement that was broad enough. So in the north of the country, there are a series of kind of major warlords, and in the west, that he, following this kind of post-conflict reconstruction methodology, you kind of alienate actors and not alienate, but, disenfranchise armed actors that are outside of government and build institutions and all that kind of stuff. But actually the reality is those guys provided the fighting force, or they could have provided the fighting force, the anchor really of the government's fighting force. And so progressively what we've seen, obviously Biden came in January, February this year, did a review of Trump's policy, because that was saying that all US troops were going to be out by May. He did a review of that and really only announced, I think the US military expected Biden to come in and reverse it. I think also the Afghan government expected Biden to reverse it, so they did no prep. Like, the Afghan government basically started prepping in May. Or June, that was when the penny dropped. So for over a year, the Americans, the training team, the NATO training teams have been telling the Afghans, really, we're not holding every district. This is not happening. We need to give up the most rural districts that are miles away. Stop trying. We can only really supply them with air support. You're not going to, you're not going to hold them. We should pull back to something more sensible. Obviously, all the main cities, all the provincial centres, the ring road, hold the kind of core of the country and let some of the more distant rural areas, of which, there are many in Afghanistan, just let them go to local control, Taliban, whatever,
Yeah, as long as the ring road and the economic hubs are maintained.
And you've got your MSRs and your customs posts and all that. And so, and that really, the US have been telling them that, or the NATO allies have been telling them that for a year, but they only really started thinking about it in May. Basically, in April, when Biden said, no, we are actually leaving, he kind of put the stamp on Trump's decision and said, but we're going to delay it till September, which I think was a logistical thing, because I think the US military hadn't done enough to get out all their stuff because they thought Biden would reverse it. And at that point, the penny dropped with the Afghan government. They needed to do something. But also that was the point. Of course, May is when the fighting season starts in Afghanistan. So, even the timing of the deal tells you how little the US understood Afghanistan. They had the final withdrawal date at May, which is the beginning of the fighting season. Why wouldn't you have the final withdrawal date at the end of October or mid-October, which is the end of the fighting season? So the government's got 6 months to bed in with a lower level of insurgent military activity. Like it's just so basic.
It makes you wonder, right? It really does make you wonder how these decisions are made, right?
The Talibs in Doha knew that Trump wanted out, full stop, and he didn't give a monkeys about how that was achieved, and that was very clear. And Zalmay Khalilzad, who's the kind of he's the sort of guy who's representing the US in these peace talks, and he's been involved in American policy to do with Afghanistan for decades, and he's rubbish. He's just so mediocre. So, the combination of kind of incompetence and stupid campaign promises and all the rest of it. Yeah. So come May, the fighting season started, the Taliban started pushing into the north, into that area where we spoke, this is where where the warlords at Ghani had pushed away. He had much stronger support in some other in the Pashtun areas. So why start there? Let's create some momentum. And then broadly, once they'd done that, then at a certain point, and I really can't even tell you any dates, because it was
all so quick as well, though. Yeah,
amazing. So probably beginning of July or mid-July, I don't know, something like that. A series of customs posts were taken at the same time.
Yeah,
and everyone said, "Oh no, well that's going to stop the revenue to the government," but that's not how Afghanistan works. Anyway, the Afghan government was relying on foreign aid and has actually got some reserves. Ghani was a World Bank guy, right? So that's all kind of sorted out. But what it did do, here's the thing: taking the customs posts. So what the customs posts represent is how the Kabul government binds in peripheral tribes and clans and ethnicities and interest groups into its system. And it says, in the kind of manner of a Roman tax collector who could, keep a percentage, they say to whatever, in Spin Buldak's a perfect example, which is the customs post in, Kandahar province, where the Adazai clan of the Achakzai have basically managed that for the government for the last 20 years. And they got very rich doing it. Thanks very much. And that ensures that the frontiers of the country are safe, right? So they're totally loyal to the government. They give a bit of money to the government. They get really rich, and so it binds. It's a political deal. It's not, it's a political deal greased by customs revenue.
Yeah,
and there's underreporting and bribes and all the rest of it. So everyone gets very nasty rich. But of course, what that also means is the Adazai, because they were the government, because they had the support of the the West, acted like little shits because it's a 43-year civil war. So everyone in Afghanistan's got some enemies. So their own guys got through. The customs post without paying duties, and then other people got tortured and shaken down, and their daughters got raped and all that kind of stuff. And so when the Taliban moved into Spin Buldak, they massacred the Adazai. So in between 100 and 1,000, who knows what the numbers are, got massacred. And what does that do? That makes it impossible for the government to re-establish its, even if they could push out from Kandahar with a military force and retake Spin Boldak, they could, but they could no longer, that clan is broken and can no longer bind the periphery to the center.
Yeah, they've lost that capital that they held, as dubious as the deals were, and it was still some nominal power balance at least, and now it's gone.
And so what this started to do was it started to fracture political deals all over Afghanistan. Because
and I guess fear as well. In my correct understanding, the fear from the those who were still tentatively siding with the government, and I've seen your own posts and of many other people of how quickly sides turned. And I think this is also another thing that, well, we at least talked about this in our previous episode as well. Is the allegiances that we often misunderstood. It's very easy for us to say cowards and so on. They've sided with the Taliban now, but I think it's a far more complex beast when your life and the life of your entire clan is on the line, right? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, so anyone who's alive today in Afghanistan is a survivor. If you're 50, you've changed sides your entire life, right?
Yeah.
And if you didn't change sides and you got killed or you got unlucky like the Adazai. So what that means is that it's a bit like a seesaw or a psychological tipping point. The government and the Taliban have got these kind of political franchises where they're trying to do all these deals, like the deals I've just described to you over the customs post, right? Or there's a checkpoint in that area, or they're growing some drugs or whatever. So there's all this political economy that's holding these franchises together.
Yeah.
And very cleverly, and I did not see, I totally have not seen this coming. I've been absolutely stunned by what's happened because I assumed that the government franchise was more stable than the Taliban franchise. But it appears that the Taliban franchise was much more stable. And they managed to fracture, starting with the customs post. It started a domino effect. And then the political deals that held apart the government franchise, political franchise, which delivers its military power, started to fracture.
Why do you refer to it as franchise? Just for context, can you clarify that? Because they're both, you refer to them rightly, I think, both as franchises. But maybe just, I think it's a nuanced point that's worth exploring.
Well, I think because, like, in many of our listeners will be in Western countries, and so they will see the government as an institution. But that's not what the government is in Afghanistan. It's a collection of interest groups. It's like a political party. And I don't mean like, because obviously we have political parties in our governments, but I mean, like, imagine if the Foreign Office was controlled by Labour, and the Home Ministry was controlled by the Conservatives, and the Liberals had another one, and all the rest of it, and then you got some kind of revenue sharing deals going on that together, right? Yeah. So basically they fractured that government franchise, and once it started to go, and basically on Thursday, I think Gardez fell, maybe Thursday Kunduz fell.
Yeah.
And that was the first point where everyone was like,
this is
because
real.
Yeah. Because so once Ghani realized in June or whenever it was that, hang on a minute, this is actually really serious. He then went back to those warlords that he'd spent the last 6 years alienating and said, hi, would you like to be part of the government? And they were like,
who are you again?
So, so that took a lot to pull together. And it's nuts, right? Because some of these warlords are actual bona fide war criminals. So what are we doing? What are we constructing to beat the Taliban, who are also war criminals? Like, what kind of Game of Thrones are we involved in here?
Yeah.
But
there was some a couple of weeks ago, even, and again, I commend you on your humility on saying that you misread some of these things, or not misread, but you were surprised by them. But there were inklings of hope almost. There was galvanized resistance. There was at least sufficient, information of the, ANSF, special forces and so on.
On Wednesday, I was quoting an op-ed with various international media outlets that basically said there's going to be a stalemate come the end of the fighting season. The government will hold the major cities, and, then my argument was we got these two political franchises, and everyone say go to Doha, but there's no point in that because the government and the Taliban can't enforce any deal over their franchises, which is something I think we want to pick up on, like how close to the Doha Talibs, how much control do they have over what's going on the ground right now? Like, I think that's a very important point I want to come back to.
Well, I mean, we'll come back to it or talk to it now even, because it's very relevant. Yeah, because that's a really relevant point and speaks to that franchise of the Taliban part.
Yeah, right. So the Talibs, like, there's the kind of Quetta guys who have been, and that's the Doha lot are drawn out the Quetta Shura, and then there's also the Haqqani network further east, and then there's the Helmandis who are like Ishaqzai drug lords, and so on and so forth. Like, there's various bits of the Taliban that are built into this franchise, personalities with tribal links, so on and so forth. And so, but before this week, I was saying, look, these guys are, the closer they get to government, the contradictions inherent in the franchise are going to become untenable. For example, the Doha lot said we're going to ban drugs when when we get into power, and the Helmandis, well, that they are a drug network. They became Talibs as part of their, to help defend their drug network. So, or the Doha lot said to China, the Uyghurs are an internal problem for China. We do not seek to, blah blah blah. And there's what's it called? The East Turkestan Independence Movement is the name of the organization that is a kind of the Uyghur insurgent terrorist, call it what you like, freedom fighter group, whatever terminology, depending on which side of the
where you sit,
where you sit. They have definitely operated in Afghanistan before. Probably quite a few of them in Badakhshan, which is the northeastern province that abuts China. So how does that play out? And then we've really clearly seen, like, because the Doha Talibs were saying we're not going to take Kabul by force. We've very clearly seen that this has come apart at this point. And so there's two theories, right? Either the Doha Talibs don't control the military guys on the ground, and they're from a different generation. The Doha Talibs, the Quetta Talibs, are like the guys from the original government back in whenever it was 2000, right? So they're a completely different generation. To a lot of the Talibs now are like weren't alive in 9/11. A lot of the guys pulling the trigger weren't alive in 9/11.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a different war again for them. Yeah,
might be older, but like they grew up. Maybe they were born during the Taliban regime or something, or they grew up in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in a camp, or they live in a madrasa or something, whatever. So they're young, and right now they are flush with victory.
Yeah.
Their eyes will be popping out their heads. They will be wanting to get into Kabul and give it to the kuffar. Yeah, because there's still, right. So this is the other thing we've got to talk about. It's like crazy. So on Friday, Herat fell, and then Kandahar fell, which is stunning.
Yeah,
mind blowing, and that happened all because of deals. Like Ismail Khan, who 2 weeks ago was like, is an old Mujahideen leader who fought the Soviets, was getting his old militia together and giving the Taliban a kicking. And then it turns out that basically, because this is the thing, the government was represented by different types of military force in each province. So there was like maybe jihadi leaders like Ismail Khan. There might have been other types of government-sponsored militias, maybe sponsored by the government intelligence service. Yeah. There would have been police. There would have been army, and there probably would have been special forces, maybe tacked on, or commandos or whatever, right? But the Afghan special forces and commandos were very effective, by the way. They fought everywhere they went really effectively. But then what happened is, what do you do if you're the Talib? You aim at the weakest part of that coalition, right? So maybe you can get the police to defect, or one of those militias that's allied, or maybe the jihadi leader, maybe you can flip him or whatever, right? Yeah. So they just went in and just fractured each. Yeah. And before we know it, we got Ismail Khan, like, he's a Talib now. Yeah. This is a guy who like fought the Talibs back in the day, got captured by them in 94. Oh God, when was Herat taken? 94, 95. And tortured or whatever, and now he is a Talib, flying to Kabul yesterday to convince Atanur, one of the other jihadi leaders in the north, to peel away from Dostum. Events are moving so fast that by the time he got there, or 20 hours after he got to Kabul, Dostum and Atanor, who've hated each other for years, had jumped in all the Black Hawks that the American government had given them and flown into Uzbekistan and fucked off. Like, totally nuts. Yeah. Because another coalition fractured up there. In Kandahar, the elders, basically, it's all negotiated across tribal lines. So in Herat, the head of the provincial council was Alizai, the major Taliban commander was Alizai. There you go.
Yeah, done. Yeah.
Right? In Kandahar, not clear what happened yet. But as soon as Kandahar city fell and the government withdrew to the army base and Kandahar airfield, Karzai flew out of Kabul down to Kandahar airfield. And we don't know this, but shortly after landing at Kandahar airfield, he negotiated the surrender of those forces, right? Amnesty for surrender. And then he went back to Kars, which is his village in just south of Kandahar city. So obviously so Karzai, watch out, mark my words. Karzai obviously is angling for
come back up, yeah.
Foreign minister, because they offered him a job back originally in the original government. He turned it down for some reason. And then, we know his history since 2001. But then obviously he's now angling for a
influential position. I mean, it's crazy, and I think it's important to stress the point there as well. When we say Kandahar fell, all these various other regional centers are falling. I think there's perhaps a perception in our minds. For those of us who are not on the ground, that it's combat, front lines, victory.
The militias, in almost every case, the locally allied militias switched sides, and then the army commanders read the runes and surrendered or switched sides. And the army troops were quite a lot of videos are circulating of the army troops saying we're up
That's
for
right.
this.
That's right. Yeah.
And the ones that did fight were the commanders and special forces, but they were, by the end, they were few and far between.
Yeah. And I guess there would be probably somehow centralized, I'd imagine now, to probably Kabul, I'd imagine.
Left.
Yeah.
There's only Kabul left, mate. So.
Yeah. So is that what are you expecting a battle, as we know, a battle for Kabul, or are we expecting a negotiation as well?
This is great, isn't it? Because by the time the podcast comes out, we'll know
the answer. Yeah.
So you need to do a prescript or a postscript.
Well, I'm just putting you on the spot, for your next 24-hour prediction.
Well, up until this morning when I woke up, I assumed there'd be a negotiation. So what the problem has been, right, is that Ghani's refused to resign. So the Taliban were once they had I don't know, 17 out of 34 provinces or whatever, or most of the major cities, whatever, right? I mean, it's obvious. As soon as Kandahar fell, that's it. The psychological tipping point had been reached, and everyone else was then looking for the deal. What's the deal?
Yeah.
Right. So everyone can read that, or anyone who's a politician can. Ghani's a technocrat, so he's living in cloud cuckoo land, right?
Well, it's funny reading his Twitter posts. I mean, his Twitter posts are almost laughable because he's kind of saying it's laughable because he's sending the message of we will stand and we will resist, and but it's almost coming at the
that would just kill people. Those people are just going to die pointlessly. The Taliban are going to be in charge of Kabul within the next 24 hours. There you go. There's your prediction.
Yeah.
And at the outside the next 48 hours. And the reason that is, it should not have got to that. Ghani should have resigned after Kandahar fell to allow a transitional government, basically a Taliban government with Karzai or something. Yeah. Whatever the deal was, doesn't matter. As long as you're not fighting for a city of 4 million people, it's stupid.
But the bloodthirst, I think you made the point, the bloodthirst of the young Talibs now, that's a real consideration. And we know
rebuffed them. I'm not resigning. That was the Taliban's condition.
Yeah.
Well, they had lots of conditions, but that was a kind of red line for them.
And we'd also know. I mean, I think you've talked about this in your other book, Why We Fight. Or maybe I'm paraphrasing, but the bloodthirst moment does take over in victory when you've kind of got the enemy, whoever your enemy might be, withdrawing, surrendering, and so on and so forth. That's when the bloodthirst really kicks off, and that's what we're seeing. I mean, there's multiple reports of atrocious things happening in all the various places where that have fallen: beheadings, torture, mass executions.
That's badal, mate. Yeah. So that's badal, which is revenge.
Yeah.
And the deal with badal is a lot of these people who've been in the government franchise have been lording it over all the people who haven't been in the government franchise, and now that the other guys have got the upper hand,
payback.
It's payback time. A lot of scores are being settled, and of course, in settling these scores, the Taliban are setting up the next Badal cycle.
Right. Yeah, the next cycle.
Right? Don't think that once Taliban take over, Afghanistan's going to be at peace.
No, of course. Yeah.
Civil war continues.
Yeah, it's and conscious of the time, Mike, and I know that you've got other engagements and other things to follow up on, but we can't not talk about the external stakeholders who are having an impact in Afghanistan. Of course, US, of course, Australia was the first one to close our embassy. Brits, you guys are basically out as well.
I see the Australians have just announced a couple of battle groups to go on standby or something.
And we're sending in some
remarkably late.
Well, we're also sending some planes to get Australians out and so on and so forth. I think the US are doing the same. I think Brits are re-rolling some people and sending 300 or 600 troops or something.
No. We're sending a para battle group, 600.
Okay, 600.
The Marines are sending 5,000. Sorry, the US is sending 5,000 US Marines.
That's right, and that's basically to facilitate the exodus of foreigners, particularly
to hold the airport, because the embassy zones are basically the European embassies are basically gone. The civilians are out of the American embassy already. There are some US military still left there, but they'll be gone at some point.
So there is still
why hold more locations.
Yeah, exactly. So and therein lies the fact that the West broadly, as in at least the kind of at least our West, the Anglo West, is lifting its hand off from Afghanistan. But there are of course other players in the region that will try to exercise their power and control. And you've been again quite public about some of those. I mean, without a doubt, Pakistan, China, those two are key players. Maybe you can talk a little bit about those dynamics and what is at play, who's playing what, and again, what are we likely to see?
I think that, this is the end of America in that part of the world. 2001, America was effectively able to unilaterally roll in. And then again in 2003, unilaterally, effectively into Iraq, right? That's over for sure. The three big powers, or the ones who've got the ability to cause the greatest trouble, are China, Russia, and India. And then, of course, all the neighbouring countries, as we've discussed, have kind of got their own ethnic.
Yeah, they've got their fingers in that pie.
Stakeholders. Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a big question around, who owns this? And this comes back actually to the situation now, right? We're trying to do a NEO, a non-combatant evacuation operation right now. It's literally the planes are taking off as we speak in Kabul, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, and the Taliban have already sprung the prison in Kabul, and they're already like on the outskirts of the city, right? So it's literally a race against time. And so then the question is like, what? It's been said by everyone that no one's going to recognize, including China, no one's going to recognize the Taliban government imposed by force, right? But that, who knows whether that'll be worth the paper it's written.
Yeah, exactly.
Tomorrow or in 10 minutes or whatever. But then is there a danger that the hostages could be taken? Probably not. I think most people are out in the airport now, so maybe that hostage risk has receded. But then whether there's a clash or what happens to the US embassy, or, all these things seem to speak about legitimacy. It seems to me the US is not going to recognize the Taliban government. So is China going to recognize the Taliban government? Because the Taliban government needs a sponsor, right? Which seems to me to be China is the obvious sponsor of that government. And because the US is not going to sponsor the Taliban government. And you could view that, if you're an American strategist, you can view that in one of two ways. Like, one, you could view it as an American disaster. And the other is you can view it as an American success. I mean, the optics, they've screwed up the optics. But handing off Afghanistan to China to make it China's problem, you could argue it is an American success. The way they've handled been atrocious, and they've totally misjudged the timing and the pace and all the rest of it.
Well, in other words, let China spend some trillions in there. Is that what you mean? Because US has spent 2 trillion?
2.3 trillion. And then the question is like, because there's all these problems with the Uyghurs and the militancy and all the rest of it. And China wants to do its BRI through there. through Afghanistan and through the Central Asian states. There's minerals it wants. It's trying to do CPEC, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is a series of roads and rails and stuff down to Gwadar in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So it's trying to get a bunch of access to the Indian Ocean, access to the Mediterranean through Afghanistan and Iran. So it's got a whole bunch of dreams that requires a hand in Afghanistan for. So then of course we come to the role of Pakistan, which the US-Pakistani relationship has been difficult to say the least since 2001, because on one hand they've kind of sheltered and supported the Taliban, but on the other hand they've been America's partner in the war on terror. And it's just crazy, bizarre. This is what I mean by American didn't sort out the regional
cognitive dissonance at a strategic level.
Amazing. And how the Americans didn't sort out the regional stuff. What's the point in sending all those troops to Afghanistan and spending all that money if you're not going to sort out the regional stuff? It's just a complete waste of money. But then as America's disengaged from Pakistan or disengaged from Afghanistan, it's needed Pakistan less. Therefore, China stepped in. It's doing the CPEC, all the rest of it. But the Chinese already are getting pissed off with the Pakistanis. There was a bomb attack by Pakistani militants on Chinese workers on the BRI project, a CPEC project, 2 weeks ago.
Right.
The Chinese then replaced the guy who was running up CPEC in Pakistan, a Pakistani, right? So they told the Pakistani government, you got to change that guy. So
I see what you mean now. I mean, initially it's not necessarily initially apparent what you mean by this might be an advantage for the US in its kind of contest with China, but it is where empires are broken, right? Afghanistan, and there are a number of there are a number of memes that are going around.
I'd like to point out the British Empire wasn't broken there.
Okay, did it actually retain control long enough to?
No, but I think that the Brits achieved their strategic policy, which was to create a buffer zone against Russia to protect India. That was the aim of Britain's strategic policy in the 1800s, and they achieved that. And yes,
but what was maybe an important point then? What was the American strategic, as you understand it, American strategic? No, but that's because I think it relates to that point, because I think you hit a nail on the head there. What was the American? It wasn't a geostrategic
policy, because the war on terror wasn't a geostrategic operation. It understood the world in terms of ideologies, but that's not how the world works. And it's certainly not how the world works in terms of the places where some of these militants live, like Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Afghanistan. Places are tribal, and they have particular cultures and histories that you need to understand. And if you don't understand them, going in and going, you're either a terrorist or you're not, which is literally what the kind of, that was the level of intellect that went into the war on terror.
Yeah.
And of course you're going to not achieve your aims. It was nonsense. It was just total intellectual bankrupt nonsense. And I've been wrong about many things over the past couple of weeks, but I've been saying that for over a decade.
Yeah, and certainly been proven right on that. Now China, again, just to kind of close that loop on China, am I right in if memory serves, China did have negotiations with the Talibs in Doha, right? They and this is not
China. Yeah, Barada went over to China and was received by the Chinese foreign minister just like a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. Okay. So that relationship is almost becoming formalized, and I think maybe you might be reading the tea leaves there by saying or asking the question: is China going to recognize Taliban? Is it in their interest to not necessarily go and make the same mistakes and try and force an issue, as opposed to just look at interests alone? And if it's in their interest to agree that Taliban is the rightful owner of or rightful ruler of Afghanistan. That might serve their interest perfectly fine.
Well, it's, I think I don't know, it's hard to say, isn't it? But everyone remembers where they were at 9/11, right? And for those who are involved in this or in any way interested in politics or history, one wonders if this will be remembered. The fall of Kabul to the Taliban will be remembered as the other bookmark. Everyone remembers where they were, like Suez, Saigon, these places where huge geostrategic shifts have occurred. And, as we discussed, that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing from a kind of Western American perspective, if we're looking at it in kind of realpolitik terms. But certainly it's been handled disastrously.
Yeah. Mike, I'm conscious of the time, and you've got other things going on, but just maybe in closing, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think is important right now that's relevant to this current context?
I think there's a huge, basically there's a huge humanitarian crisis going on at the moment in Afghanistan. The fighting has kind of probably, I don't know, up 1 million or something, 800,000 Afghans on top of the 4 million that were already displaced from the previous 43 years of the war. So I don't really know what I'm saying except to highlight that I don't know how it will go forward. I don't know whether, depends on which governments recognize Afghanistan, whether humanitarian agencies will be able to
get in there.
I mean, we're at the stage of dishing out rice and cooking oil here.
Do you think that that emergency, the humanitarian emergency, is sufficiently well recognized and echoing through the various halls of power around the world?
No, I mean, I think the various halls of power are trying to work out what the hell is going on.
And how it happened so quickly.
And to move so fast, and what it means for their interests. You know, obviously, countries with citizens in Afghanistan are focused on that, getting them out. Countries without citizens, but in the region are, obviously the regional countries without citizens as well, so they're worried about that, but they're also worried about everything else. India the head must be spinning. They've, along with the US and NATO, they've invested heavily in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. Partly as a hedge against Pakistan, right? India and Pakistan have played out their rivalry in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. So India is a big loser.
That's something that's very little understood, I think.
Yeah. But to finish, I want to highlight that humanitarian disaster. So, if there's charities that you know of that are delivering, like I say, we're talking basic foodstuffs in Afghanistan at the moment, then slip them a bit of cash. Yeah.
Very real and very sobering. Mike, thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. I'll be closely following your post as well as are the thousands of others that are doing it. Thanks for your time. We'll chat soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Voices of War. You can access all episodes on www.thevoicesofwar.com or by subscribing wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And while you're there, please give us a review, as we'd love to hear what you think. If you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can reach me on info@thevoicesofwar.com.